Now, artificial intelligence in the future, what's it? Is it going to do all the things that we do now? Will it be conducting research, publishing papers, et cetera, et cetera? Will it get to the point where it's better off without us? What exactly does that mean? But Coker points out that the notion of killer machines, self-directing machines, they're already here. There's some involvement of humans in a kill chain, but the AI basically doing the bulk of the work. Um, Humans may, in some places, identify a target, but the AI will do the rest of the work. So there's lots more weapon systems that are coming down the pipeline, and they're increasingly autonomous. And again, this is a big industry. But can they make ethical judgments, right? Does artificial intelligence really make an ethical judgment? This is basically the same as, does a computer play chess? We often talk about our machines, our computers, like my computer's aggravating me. It doesn't want to work. Well, my computer, I'll look it up. It knows this or whatever. We use these terms, but what are we saying when we say that a computer is making a decision? We often talk about artificial intelligence. You input it and it'll make certain decisions and give you answers. Is it giving you making a decision and giving you an answer? Like if you ask me or I ask you a question and you make a decision and give an answer, is that the right way to speak about them? Could a machine eventually make ethical judgments? I mean, it might make, decisions in sense of weighing possibilities or probabilities, but is it really making what we would call, as we do it, an ethical judgment? Of course, you can see this is, a difficult area of interpretation. But, some people say, look, well, whatever ethical judgments really are, machines could probably do them better, right? Look at how racist and sexist and all these things that we find in human judgments. Well, maybe machines wouldn't be like that. Maybe they would be free of all that stuff. I mean, that's also debatable. Maybe we could program them where they don't have those biases, right? How that's maybe possible, but sometimes biases in the systems are often pointed out with certain kinds of software that identifies certain kinds of facial features and can't identify others, and the net result is you get decisions, quote unquote, decisions that are made that pretty well look the same as people making those decisions that we would say made them under very biased circumstances or presuppositions. So that's not a given either. But Coker wants to ask, let's back up a little bit. We may develop these killer machines; they're around, but we're a long way away from like a conscious robot, right? And why is that? And Are we going to forever be a long way away? Like, what's going on here? Well, he's going to return back to the notion of agency. So, as I talked about in the previous video, human agency is a thorny old problem in philosophy, and we'll think a little bit more about it here. We often talk about artificial intelligence. Coker wants to talk about natural intelligence, right? So AINI, artificial, natural. Well, what exactly is natural in intelligence? Is it just rationality, logic? Is it reasonableness? Again, as I mentioned in a previous video, this is notoriously difficult to unpack. But Coker says something along the lines of, well, while you can have, killer machines, they may surprise us through their quote unquote learning. Like, we talk about machine learning. Is that the same way we learn? But for the sake of discussion, let's just go with the notion of learning and reprogramming themselves. Yes, machines already, AI already does that, right? It has its own feedback loops, so it can interact with the world and learn, right? It gets better at things, right? But is it, how should we interpret that? After all, when you use certain pieces of software, the more you engage with it, right? Think about the great problem with search engines, right? The more you engage with them, the more they become, riddled with the grooves, so to speak, metaphorically, grooves where of your previous patterns, and you'll tend to get similar kinds of results, or maybe more intense results in a certain direction. So this notion of the AI, developing or evolving, whatever term you want, or learning, is here. It's already here. But Coker wants to say something like, well, it's not going to lead to them turning on us. So that replacement hypothesis, we're eventually going to remove us from the system and turn on us and be the new us, right? He says not likely. Why? It's because at best, machines lack agency, right? Agency is a kind of natural phenomenon. It's not an artificial one. It's not something that's artificially generated. They will lack agency. So machines, AI, or computers, whatever term you want to use, AI at best will present us with actors, not agents, right? So it's kind of a downgraded agency is an actor, and also, right? Think of it in terms like it's not when you go to the theater, you're not seeing agents, you're seeing actors, and what does that mean? Well, that guy on stage is not really a king, and he's not really waging war, and when he says he's really angry, he's not really angry. He's just an actor. He's not an agent. So that's what you'll get. AI is like the actors on the stage, not like we are agents in the real world. So you get, so to speak, a kind of theater. That's really what artificial intelligence will give you. It might look very real. It might convince you, but it's really not. At the end of it, it's not real. It's a representation of something that, it convinces you that it's the real thing. But it's just theater. So why is it though that he thinks that AI will always be at the level of the actor collaborator? Yes, we work with AI, we collaborate with it already. So why is it that AI can't make that leap, shall we say, off the stage and join us here? And really not just be a mere collaborator, but a fellow citizen. Why can't we eventually talk about, we will be friends with artificial intelligence, and of course people are talking about all kinds of relationships that human beings will have with robots and computers, etc., etc. People will often talk about loving their computers and things like that. So why can't we take that a little more strongly? Why don't they have agency? Well, Hooker gives us some reasons for this, about 3 of them. He suggests that there are a lot more. Some of his reasons strike me as being similar. The first couple of reasons seem to be a variation of a single idea that goes something like, AI doesn't have motivations, right? It's a directionless sort of entity. It's not goal driven. Where natural intelligence is intrinsically motivated. It's a mix of motions, instincts, drives, and it's goal driven to survive. AI is not like that. And natural intelligence is equipped with natural desire to be useful, very different than just simply being used. And natural intelligence desires to fit a role. And it's interesting that he referred back to Plato, because that's Plato said that everything naturally seeks a good, right? A certain kind of version of the ultimate good, but that is a good for it, right? And Plato extended that to the general universe, but Coker seems to be, really taking that idea and applying it more or less just to natural intelligence, not that it can be duplicated and generalized. So it's a natural desire to achieve a goal. AI really doesn't have this notion of a natural desire. You could easily take an AI program and change it to self-destruct, but that wouldn't make the AI consider itself a kind of martyr, right? You say, well, if you encounter this situation, then go back, click on a subroutine that would erase the whole program, and a self-destruction. So there's the distinction here is that with natural intelligence, it really has this notion of desire, direction. That's intrinsic to the system. This one doesn't have it, right? Has to be put in some way from the outside, whereas we have that sort of natural direction intrinsic sort of desire for surviving. Um, Also, natural intelligence has an intrinsic understanding, a self-understanding of its own agency. We see ourselves as reasonable, even though we may not always act like it, maybe we're wrong about it, but we see ourselves as rationally trying to get and achieve our goals, as problem solvers. But this doesn't mean, like, I don't mean by, and Coker doesn't mean that, seeing yourself as reasonable is perfectly logical, but you're not an irrational kind of entity. You see yourself as using reason. So yes, evolution may have led us to be unreasonable in certain cases, but nonetheless, we have a reasonable approach to our own self-interest and survival. Coker also brings in a very old argument about free will, and that turns on this kind of one, that natural intelligence can reject its quote-unquote programming, right? You could choose to do all kinds. You could choose to end your existence or not end your existence, and this sort of comes back to the old line by the existentialist writer Camus, right? It's a fundamental decision whether or not you continue to participate in the universe or you end it all. But that is a decision you make, right? So you could end all your programming, your existence. Natural intelligence does that. Artificial intelligence doesn't do that. It doesn't have that intrinsic ability to make that kind of reasoned decision. Again, you could program it to do that or not do that, but that's not a natural part of it. So that's a very old argument that there is some kind of fundamental free will in natural intelligence because it can essentially reject all of its programming. Any proposition that you learn about yourself, you could come to reject it. Whereas a computer program, there would be certain propositions that it couldn't in principle reject because those are the ones that it uses to run. So its fundamental programming is something like, I don't know, maybe it's firmware, or whatever you want to think of it. It can't reject that, whereas you can. Is this true? This is an interesting claim. Can you reject all the elements that went into your quote-unquote natural programming? If it is, then there is an argument to be made for a distinction. And so natural intelligence, is not locked into its programming the way artificial intelligence is. And so to go back to that old Asimov story, where the robot is, I didn't mention this, but the Asimov story is this robot gets trapped in its own programming and is kind of aimlessly wandering around on the surface of Mercury. We're not like that. We don't get trapped in those kinds of feedback loops, and we don't crash in our programming the way that artificial intelligence can. All right, so that's this is an old idea, and we have a kind of ethical life which is uniquely human. That's an old idea that goes back to Aristotle, and it really doesn't lend itself to being conceptualized. And that's probably the most interesting aspect of this discussion in general, is there's something that we do that cannot be conceptualized. And traditionally, there have been attempts, and we'll look at some of those later, to deal with certain kinds of problems in computer programming when you try to conceptualize notions that we often think are part of our natural intelligence and are kind of intuitive. So this comes out even in higher level mathematics, certain notions in mathematics that seem intuitively graspable, they're notoriously difficult to conceptualize with rigor in the language of mathematics. And so where does this all end up? Well, Coker says, well, look, how much danger machines are going to be will be dependent on how much control we hand over to them. And those ultimate decisions, they lie with us. So the danger is really how much we hand over to artificial intelligence, not a matter of it just taking control.